In the 1990s, home AV systems went through an unusual period. The echoes of the booming 80s were still audible, but the home technology industry, particularly hi-fi, began to change significantly. Be that as it may, the 90s saw the birth of many iconic devices that still evoke nostalgia and sometimes even awe. And no, this time we're not talking about the famous 90s mini hi-fi systems. In this video, we will recall several legendary devices, or components, that some of us owned, while others only dreamed of owning. We will move in chronological order, so don't think of this video as a ranking. It's a selection in which each model deserves attention and respect. So, let's begin. Pioneer A400. The Pioneer A400 integrated amplifier, released at the beginning of the decade, made a huge impression on music lovers. At a very reasonable price, this device offered sound that was previously only available in expensive models: detailed, dynamic, fast sound with excellent bass response. Competitors were taken aback. The A400 forced everyone, from British brands Arkham and Cyrus to Japanese brand Denon, to urgently refine their amplifiers in order to keep up. This black rectangular amplifier looked modest, without any frills, no equalizers or flashing lights. But inside, it had solid circuitry, a powerful transformer, and minimal signal path. For many music lovers of the late 80s and early 90s, the Pioneer A400 was their first real amplifier. It was often paired with the popular Mission or Wharfedale speakers of the time, and this combination produced a surprisingly mature sound. Technics new Class A. In the 1970s and 1980s, the Japanese company Technics became famous as a manufacturer of reliable and modern equipment. In the early 1990s, the company continued this tradition by releasing a whole range of hi-fi components. In the context of the 1990s, the so-called Technics new Class A series certainly deserves attention. In 1991, the SU-VX800 amplifier from this series was one of the company's flagship products. Only the rare SU-MA10 and SU-VX900 models were higher in the catalogue. The SU-VX800's unique feature was its smooth transition to Class A mode to reduce distortion. With an output of over 100 watts per channel, the amplifier had a dual mono power supply, 2 transformers under the cover, impressive 15,000 microfarads capacitors and discrete transistors on a massive heat sink. The amplifier was supposed to be paired with other Technics components: the top-of-the-line Technics RSB965 cassette deck and CD player. The RSB965 deck became something of a legend, a 3-head AA-class cassette deck, combining the advantages of classes A and B, with support for every conceivable sound enhancer: Dolby B, C, HX Pro, and even DBX. This deck was produced from around 1990 to 1993, and in terms of recording quality, it was unrivaled in the Panasonic lineup. Sony ES. In the 1990s, Japanese giant Sony produced both mass-market standard quality equipment and premium equipment as part of its ES, or Elevated Standard, line. For example, the Sony TCA7ES integrated amplifier was a powerful and heavy, 21 kilograms, beauty in black or champagne color with wooden side panels. The amplifier delivered a decent and honest 100 watts per channel. Many people used it in tandem with the same top-of-the-line Sony CDP-A777ES CD player. These devices impressed with their build quality: copper chassis, dual transformers, thick aluminium front panels. Sony engineers did not skimp on the CDP-A777ES, equipping it with a professional DAC and a gear-driven tray. The sound of the ES series matched its appearance: transparent, powerful, and refined. It was no coincidence that many audiophiles in the early 1990s ranked Sony ES alongside recognized high-end brands. Marantz CD63 KI signature. By the mid-1990s, audio technology had taken a leap forward in the digital direction. 1995 saw the arrival of a player that many at the time called the best in its class, the Marantz CD63 KI signature. Marantz has always been known for making excellent CD players at affordable prices, but the CD63 KI model was their true pinnacle. It was an improved version of the CD63, refined by the legendary Ken Ishiwata. The initials KI in the name stand for Ken Ishiwata. The engineers replaced a number of key components with select ones, reinforced the chassis design, and optimized the power supply, all for the sake of maximum sound quality. The result exceeded expectations. Experts noted an increase in detail, more subtle dynamics, and a noble sound. The balance shifted towards warm and smooth tones, but the player did not lose its drive and emotionality. For many music lovers, the Marantz CD63 KI became the benchmark. It showed that digital could sound soulful. Yamaha DSP A3090. In the second half of the 1990s, stereo systems had to make way for a new craze, home cinema. The first multi-channel receivers and amplifiers capable of decoding the new Dolby Digital AC3 format from laserdiscs and DVDs appeared. In 1995, Yamaha released the DSP A3090, the world's first integrated amplifier with Dolby Digital 5.1 support. This unit, priced at around $1,700, looked impressive: a huge body, a bunch of connectors for speakers, front, center, rear, subwoofer, and the proud AC3 digital logo on the front panel. The Yamaha A3090 was a real breakthrough, ushering in a new era, the era of surround sound. Many people at the time still believed that the good old Dolby Pro-Ject 4-channel was quite capable of creating a cinema effect and were in no hurry to switch to expensive digital amplifiers. But time put everything in its place. With the growth in the number of DVD players and available discs, Dolby Digital conquered the world, and the Yamaha DSP A3090 is now remembered with respect as a pioneer of the 5.1 era. Sony TC-KA7ES. Despite the rise of CDs, audio cassettes continued to dominate for most of the decade. People copied albums, compiled their own compilations, and listened to them in their car stereos. But by the end of the 1990s, it was clear that the age of cassettes was coming to an end. Before the format's demise, companies squeezed the most out of analog recording technology by releasing stunningly sophisticated cassette decks. One of the most famous was the Sony TC-KA7ES, the flagship of the ES line, introduced in 1995 and produced until the end of the decade. It was Sony's last top-of-the-line cassette deck, a sort of swan song for the cassette genre. What was so special about it? Practically everything: a three-head design with separate recording and playback paths, a dual capstan with quartz stabilization, exclusive crystal alloy heads, and two separate R-core power transformers. Of course, it had a full set of noise reduction features: Dolby B, C, S, the latter borrowed from Dolby SR professional equipment, and even HX Pro, plus support for the rare professional DBX. In short, the TC-KA7ES could provide fantastically clean sound, and its precise calibration allowed you to get the most out of any cassette. Denon DM3. If in the first half of the 1990s the main dream was a huge rack of components, by the end of the decade the opposite trend had begun: compactness. 1998 saw the release of a device that showed that micro can be macro in terms of sound. We are talking about the Denon DM3, the first representative of the famous Denon M series of microsystems. The compact DM3 set, only half the width of a standard component, included a compact disc player and radio tuner, as well as a pair of small but high-quality speakers. Unlike the bulky combines of the past, the DM3 looked modest and stylish, nothing superfluous on the panel, only the essentials. But it made you forget about its size, the amazingly balanced and rich sound for which this little thing was famous. Of course, an expensive separate amplifier with speakers will perform better, but it will also cost a lot more. The Denon DM3, on the other hand, offered hi-fi sound at a reasonable price, lively, exciting, and with the right soundstage. Sony QS. As the decade draws to a close, we cannot fail to mention a series that the authors themselves call the last of the Mohicans. In 1999, Sony released its final line of classic component systems called QS, Quality Standard, and for many, it became the farewell chord of the hi-fi era. All components in this series were released in 1999, and Sony made them to the highest standards, almost on par with their previous top models. A typical Sony QS set included a Sony TA-FB940 QS integrated amplifier, a Sony CDP-XB930 QS CD player, a Sony TC-KA7ES QS cassette deck, and a minidisc player of the same class. All devices had a uniform, austere design, black or silver metallic, massive rotary knobs, large fluorescent displays. In terms of status, the QS series ranked second after the Super Elite ES, but the engineers themselves claimed that in some respects the QS even surpassed the ES. For example, the TA-FB940 amplifier had two separate transformers, as in expensive models, and in general the circuitry in the QS was very advanced. While the ES series gradually faded from the scene, the QS series became Sony's last attempt to bring back the taste for true hi-fi to the mass consumer. The series did not last long, until about 2003, with later models being more geared towards home cinema or significantly downgraded. Pro-Ject debut. Finally, a few words should be said about the vinyl renaissance that began at the end of the decade. In 1999, a small European company called Pro-Ject created a turntable that became the symbol of affordable vinyl for a new generation, the Pro-Ject debut. Since its founding in 1990, Pro-Ject has focused on simple and inexpensive turntables, and it was the debut that fully realized their slogan. Designing its products in Austria and manufacturing them in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Pro-Ject created a real success story in Central Europe. The debut became perhaps its most successful product. The name debut is ironic, because in fact it was not the company's first turntable, but it was with this model that a global wave of renewed interest in vinyl began. Pro-Ject debut offered everything that inexperienced enthusiasts wanted: ease of setup, reliability, no frills, just what was necessary for high-quality record playback. At a price significantly lower than audiophile models, the debut sounded much better than one might have expected. It was the honest, pleasant sound of vinyl, that warm analog sound that people had grown to miss. Well, that concludes our selection of legendary devices from the 90s. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to support the channel. Likes, comments, subscriptions, and you can always support the channel with the thank you button, membership registration, or by using the links provided in the channel description. Thank you all, and until the next video.